We listed all these best management practices, but I'm going to summarize them for you. So for these various land uses and these key natural capital, what did we learn? With forestry, we need wider riparian buffer strips. We need higher in-block retention of green trees. We need faster road reclamation, longer rotation ages, and improved integration between forestry and other land uses. Those are the key levers when we ran the model that had the most benefit. And there would be a consequence in terms of cut. In terms of residential, it should apply to all of us in this room. We need to talk about discouraging urban sprawl. We have to stop draining wetlands as we build acreages. We need to look at clustered rural recreation residential rather than spaced uniform acreages. Improve septic systems and pet control were some that surfaced. In terms of recreation, we needed to go to a designated trail network, avoid sensitive areas, minimize or restrict OHVs, look at better human waste management, pet management, minimize night activity. For crops, we've got to get away from riparian habitat. We've got to reduce the nutrient, sediment, and herbicide runoff. We have to stop expanding our cultivated lands into native prairie, and we need to convert cultivated lands to perennial lands. For livestock, off-stream salting, manure management, greater emphasis on perennial grasses, and reduced emphasis on annual forages. All of those things, we're not talking about getting rid of land use, we're talking about changing it. All of those had billions of dollars of improvement. So we need to talk about moving forward and going from tactical to strategic as I'm going to start wrapping this up. For people in this room and all these issues that confront us, we need to continue to pay attention to the issues of the day. That's a short-term, tactical, immediate. Those are important. But we need to lift our head out of the sand a little bit and talk about the long-term issues. So again, remind ourselves of the land uses that shape this landscape. But start thinking about the future and being bold about what it is we want when we grow up, because we're getting something whether we want it or not if we're quiet. We need to be thinking about what amount of time in the future. We can talk about when your kids are your age or when your kids are your grandparents' age. And there's an amazing diversity of organizations in and around Bragg Creek, I think, that have some very strong views. So how do we sell the story? What is the narrative? Well, I think part of it is under ecosystem services. So this is your system. This is amazing. It's one system. It's integrated naturally. We've just decoupled it through our approaches on our land use. So there's Calgary. We're providing them with clean, abundant water, or can. It's still pretty darn good. There's still amazing biodiversity. There's still amazing carbon sequestration. All of these amount to several $billion a year of value. We need to make that. We need to make all the stakeholders aware of that, and we need to incorporate those values into any decision making. Let's move to recreation and spiritual. So non-motorized recreation, spiritual recharge, that's another very important argument. I think things are beginning to change. I mean, look at Sarah Amaligi, and she won in that Kananaskis riding, that Banff Kananaskis riding. And for those of you that followed her, she was telling a story in a much more elegant way than I am. She told a story about natural capital and maintaining ecological goods and services. Her story was not an anti-business strategy. It was a pro-business strategy that incorporated natural goods and services. I read a fascinating letter by Eric Lloyd a couple days ago to the Premier talking about logging. And Eric just basically laid out all of the key best practices that we learned from Harvey Buckley's study a decade ago. That we need to be doing these things. Not that we're not doing them at all, but we need to do them better. And the most important story, I think, was we've got recreation over here and it's doing its thing, and we've got forestry and they're not properly integrated, and we're bumping into each other. So these landscapes that seem to be so big with so little going on now are getting to feel very, very small with lots going on. So So who's the audience? You know, this room, I guess, for sure. We need to think about this and discuss it. Calgary, for sure. Is it the councillors of Rocky View or the mayor of Calgary or MLA or a premier? Yeah, for sure. But I think we'd be foolish not to be wondering about who's making tomorrow's decision makers. And I'm pleased that Jen Jansen and her daughter, both of which won Emerald Awards, have been out in Bragg Creek and at the school talking about Alberta Tomorrow, which is being used extensively across Alberta in schools to let kids literally grow landscapes in the future and understand the trade-offs, where they get to be the premier for a day, they can make whatever decision they want and see what it does to food and water and grizzlies and wood fiber. And so these kind of programs can help our kids tomorrow understand that land uses without exception create benefits, and without exception create liabilities. And we're not managing this landscape in a way that is integrated. They're all bumping into each other. So that leads us to probably the key message, which is priority land use. Our system only has so much to give, whether it's wood fiber or biodiversity or water. And every one of these land uses exists. And they exist in silos. And they need to be integrated. And the land use framework was supposed to deal with this issue. And my organization, the colleagues I worked with, were pretty front and center for 3 or 4 years looking at that. And as it was deployed in Alberta, it was essentially abandoned because the government and industry came to realize that if you integrate land uses, you can't find a win-win, win-win scenario where everyone can do everything all the time. What it required is trade-offs. It required people to have discussions about what are the priority land uses, and that was an unpalatable conversation for government and industry. So all the organizations in around Bragg Creek, we need to have that discussion and demand that we move into integrated landscape management, or it's going to literally be death by 1,000 cuts. So I can guarantee you every day these sectors are sitting around the table figuring out how they're going to deploy their business plans, and without exception, they're based on growth. And the organizations that red are largely left with what remains. So we need that conversation to talk about this landscape and what it's supposed to do. And you know what? We've got power of place. We are generating ecological goods and services that, if known, Calgary would not want altered. And so we've got all these organizations that need to beat that drum and make people aware of the phenomenal assets that this area has. So here's the kind of, I think, the most critical slide, but it's not very pretty. What do we have in Bragg Creek? Aesthetics, water, naturalness, wildlife populations. That's why all of you guys at one time or another went and walked into some realty office, whether it be 50, 40, 30 years ago. Those features are being degraded every single year by land use footprint and the intensity of human activity. These create benefits, but I guarantee you they're bleeding this natural capital. Now, we can make some of those problems go away with best management practices. Dealing with pets, how you conserve habitat, pest removal, bird feeders, drive slow. These things we need to do. These are best management practices. But the problem is land use footprint intensity of human activity is being driven by increasing human population. Every single year we have another 2.5% more people on this watershed. And every single year those people are also increasing their per capita consumption, whether it be wood, water, energy, food, recreation, or consumables. Like, the amount of this material that we consume today is nothing like it was 10 years ago. Okay? So there's more of us consuming more. And they're all driven by an economic growth strategy that says we've got to grow. So the analyses show that number of people, increasing number of people, and the per capita resource consumption of wood, water, energy, food, recreation, the upper bow, has led to a loss of natural capital. That is just hands down a fact. Now, best management practices. are really helpful and good, and we need to do them. But they're not going to change that trend. It's going to be overwhelmed by the number of people and their demands for resources. So when we look at these landscapes, and you guys know where this is, see that bridge? Yeah, have they changed? Yeah. But what remains is still comparatively remarkable. The natural capital is still phenomenal. You can still find these species. You can still see them. You can still enjoy Mother Nature. There's still places to go that make you feel good. It's still a beautiful landscape. It's still an iconic landscape. It's one of the most iconic in the world.